My name is Samantha. I'm 35, a nurse practitioner with a six-figure salary, and until a week ago, I truly believed I was saving my family. For years, I'd been the steady support paying the mortgage, taking care of my brother's constant emergencies, and sacrificing savings so they wouldn't struggle. My role was simple provider. Everything changed, not with a financial statement, but with a single voicemail notification. I'd just finished a 12-hour shift at the hospital and was heating up a pre-cooked dinner in the microwave when my phone rang. It was my brother Jacob. I wiped my hands on my surgical scrubs and opened the chat expecting the usual panicked plea about the overdue utility bill. But this time, it was a podcast. I pressed play without thinking. The cold laughter of my parents hit me first. Then my dad's voice rang out crystal clear. "She's a miserable failure, but at least she's useful paying our bills." My mom immediately chimed in, her voice dripping with calculated pity. "We're just pretending to be worried, Jacob. It's only for her money. She's too soft to say no." They laughed again, a harsh, ugly, contemptuous sound that cut through the silence of my apartment. I stood frozen, my phone vibrating in my hand, the audio file disappearing instantly. Jacob had realized his catastrophic mistake and canceled the message. But I heard it. Every damned word. My heart didn't break. It was cold. If you've ever been a family ATM or felt a drain, share your story in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications to follow Samantha's entire recovery and response. We'll explore how to use American law to make this a final victory. And finally, tell me where on earth you are and what time frame is our story going together. It was a cold, bright December afternoon when the trap was fully set. I thought back to 8 months earlier when my life was stable and entirely under my control. I was a nurse practitioner at a major healthcare system in Kansas City, pulling down a solid 6 figures a year. My independence felt earned. I paid for my own studies, worked 3 jobs to get out of the house, and never asked them for a dime. My role in the family was always the responsible one, the provider. Jacob, my older brother, on the other hand, was the charming dreamer perpetually chasing the next big, implausible startup idea. He showed up at my apartment one evening, no prior text, just his usual desperate energy. He looked impeccably dressed, but carried that desperate undertone in his eyes that I knew too well. He claimed he had secured a massive contract for his new tech venture, a supposed smart home device, but needed a $50,000 bridge loan for specialized inventory collateral he said he couldn't put up because his assets were tied up. The bank required a co-signer due to his volatile business history, a polite term for his string of bankruptcies. I already knew the drill. Jacob played on my sense of family responsibility, the one they had carefully cultivated over 2 decades. "Mom and Dad are worried about me going under, Sam. Please. Just this once, I'm good for it. I just need your name for the bank's paperwork." I hesitated for 2 days. That money represented a significant portion of my emergency fund, the money I was saving for a down payment on my own home. But the relentless guilt trips, my mother's passive-aggressive worries about Jacob's stress levels, and my father's lectures about blood being thicker than water, wore me down. I signed the documents at the bank telling Jacob, "This is it. This is the absolute last time. You stick to the payment plan, or you're on your own." He hugged me, promising the first repayment would be on time, a debt he would never forget. For 4 months, the payments were made right on schedule. Then the voice message incident happened. The day after I heard the vile truth, a cold dread replaced my shock. I wasn't worried about the payment. I was worried about the $500 I saw withdrawn from my emergency savings account the week before. A withdrawal I never authorized right around the time Jacob was supposed to make his loan payment. That withdrawal was one of the many small, insidious banking red flags I had ignored because I trusted him. It meant the payments had stopped long before the voice message. The clock had been ticking toward my financial ruin for weeks, and their laughter was the sound of the final countdown. The cold realization that the $50,000 loan was now entirely my responsibility hit me harder than the laughter in the audio file. It was the principle of the financial exploitation and the scale of the deceit. The very next morning, I faced the first domino effect. I was short on my rent payment. I had emptied my checking account trying to cover Jacob's massive shortfall, a financial drain I now recognized as a deliberate act of sabotage. My landlord's system was automated and unforgiving. I received the first official warning, a 3-day pay or quit notice taped to my door. It was the ultimate irony the provider was about to be made homeless because the dependents she subsidized were financially cannibalizing her. I called Jacob, but not for money. I needed to hear the lie again. He finally answered, sounding groggy. "What, Sam? I'm busy. I'm trying to close this new deal." I cut him off. "The loan is due, Jacob. And I know you pulled 10,000 from my savings. I see the unusual account activity." The shift in his voice was immediate and chilling. He dropped the charming act entirely. "Look, I needed it for the business, Sam. You have more than enough. Just cover it this month. You're overreacting. It's just a loan payment, not the end of the world." His casual dismissal of my financial jeopardy proved everything the voice message had said. To them, I was an endless resource, and any panic on my part was mere overreaction. I told him, "It is the end of my world, Jacob. I can't pay my rent. I am facing eviction." He laughed, a short, nervous sound. "Just send the payment like Mom said. You always find a way. You're the responsible one." I hung up. I didn't waste another second. I called the only person I trusted who understood the American legal and financial system, Kelsey. We had been college roommates, and she was now a corporate attorney. "Kelsey, they cleaned me out. I'm facing eviction because I co-signed a $50,000 loan and they're not paying." Her initial reaction was professional shock. "Samantha, you need to save your credit score right now. The eviction itself is bad, but the debt going to collections is catastrophic." 2 weeks later, the final eviction order came from the county court. I packed my belongings into storage, the $8,000 in past due rent officially marked as uncollected. My perfect financial history, my foundation as the provider, had been officially shattered. I realized this was not just about the money. It was about the destruction of my future by the people who claimed to love me. My forced move was the moment the shame began to mix with the bitter, purifying anger. I was 35, a high-earning professional, crashing on Kelsey's couch, all because of an audio file and a co-signed document. The very act of being forced to find a new apartment highlighted the depth of the trouble Jacob had caused. Kelsey explained the harsh reality of the U.S. housing market. "The eviction order itself won't show up on your credit report, Sam. But the uncollected $8,000 in past due rent that gets sold to a collections agency, that is what will ruin you." Within days, my phone started ringing with unknown numbers. It was Hammerhead Collections. They were aggressive, relentless, and completely legal. Kelsey sat me down to explain the damage. "Payment history accounts for 35% of your FICO score. A collections entry is a major red flag, a stain that would remain on my record for 7 years. Every application I filled out for a new apartment, for a credit card, even for an insurance policy, would flash the warning, high risk." We immediately filed a police report regarding the stolen $10,000 from my savings, but without clear, undeniable evidence of identity theft, it was classified as a dispute over family funds. The parents and Jacob began their second wave of manipulation, not by asking for money, but by showing up at Kelsey's place, completely violating my privacy. My father showed up uninvited, his face a mask of false concern. "Samantha, what is this nonsense? We raised you. You need to drop this collections issue. Jacob is stressed because you are making this whole thing so difficult. He was using my struggle to protect their peace." I cut him off, maintaining a calm voice that belied the internal rage. "I am on Kelsey's couch, Dad, because of your stressed son. The bank owns the loan, and the collections agency owns the $8,000 in rent. I am legally responsible for all of it. If you want this to go away, you and Mom need to pay Jacob's $50,000 loan and the $8,000 I owe the landlord. His face went pale. We can't do that, Samantha. We don't have that kind of liquidity. You know we're retired. That confirmed their role. They were fully aware and complicit in the financial exploitation. They were trying to manage my reaction, not solve the underlying problem. The confrontation ended, but the real crisis had just begun. The next day, Kelsey got an email alert. Hammerhead Collections had just filed a civil lawsuit against Samantha Miller in county court. The civil lawsuit was the ultimate weapon in the hands of the debt collector. Kelsey explained that since I hadn't had the means to hire a dedicated lawyer to contest the collection's debt, a default judgment would be inevitable. And a civil judgment, she warned, was public record, the precursor to true ruin. It allows the creditor to use the full force of the law to seize assets or income. 4 days after the court filing, I was called into the Human Resources office at the hospital. Mrs. Albright, the HR manager, a professional woman who had always been cordial, sat across from me, her expression strictly formal. She did not look sympathetic. She looked annoyed. Samantha, we received this today. It is a writ of wage garnishment. The phrase hit me like a physical blow. The document ordered my employer, the very institution that represented my stability and success, to legally withhold 25% of my disposable earnings to pay the debt to Hammerhead Collections. Mrs. Albright explained without emotion that this was a legal requirement and an administrative headache for the department. She added a chilling implication: we value all our nurse practitioners, Samantha, but sustained legal difficulties that disrupt payroll procedures are understandably concerning. It was a veiled threat. The very high income I earned, which made me a good target for my family, now made me a perfect target for the collections agency. My 6-figure salary had become my biggest weakness. I walked out of that office feeling physically violated. My professional reputation was now tarnished by a public civil judgment, and I was losing a quarter of every paycheck. The anger toward my parents and Jacob boiled over into a focused, freezing determination. They wanted me to be the pathetic loser. They wanted me to submit to the manipulation, but they had failed to account for my financial literacy and my legal ally. I met Kelsey that evening. She looked at the garnishment order. They didn't just want your money, Sam. They wanted you to be weak enough to come crawling back. But this order is their mistake. Kelsey pointed out that the collections agency had to use Jacob's original fraudulent loan application details to track my assets. I found a small, significant detail in Jacob's old corporate filing for that equipment loan. He claimed the $50,000 was for a business equipment purchase in Kansas, but I found a receipt, a deposit for a property down payment in Orlando, Florida. This evidence proved that the co-signed loan was fraudulent from the beginning, not a failed business venture, but a deliberate criminal act of financial exploitation. With Kelsey's legal discovery, the dynamic shifted entirely. This was no longer just about debt. It was about criminal fraud and the deliberate destruction of my livelihood. We had the evidence necessary to press charges against Jacob, a nuclear option that would destroy the entire family's facade. But my goal wasn't just revenge. It was absolute, uncompromised self-liberation. I needed to cut the emotional cord, not just the financial one. I called Jacob not from my personal number, but from Kelsey's burner phone. I used a calculatedly neutral tone. Jacob, I need to talk to you about the Orlando property. Meet me tomorrow at the public square alone. He panicked immediately, his voice cracking. He knew he'd been tracked. He tried to involve the parents. We should talk as a family, Sam. Mom is really worried. I delivered the final sharp line. If you don't show up, Jacob, I will file a civil RICO claim based on the financial exploitation of a dependent elder dad. You come alone, or I send this file directly to the district attorney. This was a bluff, but the threat of a public criminal investigation was enough. He agreed. The next afternoon, I met him in the bustling public square, the neutral territory adding to the clinical feeling of the final business transaction. He arrived frantic, his eyes darting around. I was dressed in my professional clothes, a stark contrast to his wrinkled shirt. I didn't waste time on sentiment. I placed a manila folder on the table. Inside this folder is everything Jacob: the loan document, the Orlando deposit receipt, and the wage garnishment order. I didn't shout. I spoke with a quiet authority he had never heard. You didn't just fail, Jacob. You committed fraud against me, your cosigner, and, by extension, against the bank. The bank is garnishing 25% of my salary. I watched his expression shift from fear to ugly resentment, the face of the pathetic loser caller. You can't do this, Sam. We're family. He hissed, the ultimate emotional blackmail. I responded calmly, definitively, I am not. Not anymore. I have prepared 2 documents. The first is a legal declaration detailing your financial exploitation. The second is a voluntary agreement that you will assume full legal responsibility for the $50,000 loan and pay the $8,000 of my past due rent directly to the collections agency by the end of the month. I pushed the documents toward him. Sign them, or the next call I make is to the police. The cold, hard reality of the manila folder on the table was what finally broke Jacob. He scanned the Orlando property deposit receipt, then the civil judgment, and finally the wage garnishment order. His face was an ugly mixture of fear and self-pity. He hadn't been worried about me. He had been worried about the consequences of his fraud. You can't ruin me, Sam. If I sign this, I'm done. They'll know I committed financial exploitation. You ruined yourself, Jacob. I replied, my voice steady. You used my trust and you used the system. This agreement simply means you take responsibility for the $50,000 loan and the $8,000 of my past due rent that went to collections. I explained the gravity. Signing the agreement meant he was legally assuming the debt burden and giving me the documentation necessary to prove my status as a victim of family fraud to the credit bureaus and the collections agency. He tried one last emotional blackmail. What about Mom and Dad? They'll lose everything if I go under. They'll be on the streets, Samantha. That was the last thread of the old emotional dynamic. I looked him dead in the eye, finally cutting the cord. They will be exactly where they planned to be, Jacob. They have their retirement funds and they have each other. They made their choice the moment Dad called me a pathetic loser for being their free ATM. I am choosing me. Jacob signed. He didn't sign out of remorse, but out of absolute fear of the district attorney. He quickly snatched the documents and bolted, leaving me alone with the quiet satisfaction of a clean surgical cut. This confrontation was not about securing an apology. It was about securing my legal and emotional freedom. The very next day, I officially changed my work email and phone numbers. I blocked my parents and Jacob on every single platform. It was a terrifying act of self-preservation, but the silence that followed was the first real peace I had known in years. I didn't feel victorious. I felt surgically empty, but definitively free. After securing the signed documents from Jacob, the work to undo the financial wreckage was just beginning. I called Kelsey, who immediately helped me file the necessary documentation. Kelsey emphasized that the key to rehabilitation was not trying to erase the existence of the debt, which was impossible, but to change the narrative of the debt. The credit bureaus need to see that you, Samantha, were ultimately victimized, not negligent. We used Jacob's signed declaration to prove the loan was a clear case of financial exploitation, Kelsey explained, highlighting a core concept in my recovery strategy. We spent weeks communicating directly with Hammerhead Collections, using Jacob's signed confession to negotiate. We pointed out that if I successfully filed a criminal complaint against Jacob, the original creditor might have grounds to argue they were defrauded, creating a legal mess for the collections agency. By shifting the debt responsibility to Jacob and having me settle the remaining collections balance on the past due rent, we achieved a crucial victory. The collections item was marked as satisfied on my report, rather than unpaid. While the entry remained for 7 years, the status change was a massive leap forward for my FICO score. The psychological toll remained. I had effectively traded my family for a credit score. Kelsey reminded me that my biggest mistake was believing that my role as the provider was permanent, and that the consequences of stepping outside that role would be catastrophic. The truth was, the consequences of staying in that role would have been far worse. My new life began with a strong, definitive boundary. The high-paying job, which had been a liability, was now my greatest asset for recovery. I knew that one day my credit score would heal, but the betrayal in that voice message would remain a permanent reminder of the true cost of unconditional trust. 2 months later, the dust began to settle. The wage garnishment order was lifted after Kelsey presented the legal settlement with Jacob to the hospital HR manager. Mrs. Albright, clearly relieved, gave me a subtle nod of respect for handling the mess professionally. My salary was fully restored, but the $8,000 collections entry was still a massive burden on my credit report. However, due to the new legal documentation proving I was the victim of fraud rather than simply an irresponsible debtor, Kelsey was able to negotiate with Hammerhead to have the debt status changed to settled for less than the full amount. I opened a secured credit card and took out a small credit builder loan, meticulously focusing on my payment history, the 35% of my FICO score that had been destroyed by their actions. I was focused on rebuilding the life they tried to collapse. As for the rest of the family, the truth was swift and brutal, a real consequence in the unforgiving American financial landscape. Since Jacob was legally responsible for the loan, the bank started pursuing him aggressively, quickly obtaining their own wage garnishment order against any income he might generate. The collections agency also went after him for the $8,000 rent debt. His volatile startup life collapsed instantly. Jacob and my parents were forced to move into a low-rent apartment outside of Kansas City, their financial standing shattered. My parents couldn't save Jacob without ruining their own retirement, the exact scenario they had tried to force upon me. I never heard directly from them again. There were attempts, of course, through distant relatives and old friends, messages filled with passive-aggressive worry about my mental state, and veiled threats that I would one day regret abandoning family. But I held the line. The value this story offers is a harsh lesson in setting financial boundaries. Family is not an obligation to be exploited. Emotional abuse disguised as love is still abuse, and in the American system, that abuse can translate directly into a civil judgment, collections, and the loss of your livelihood. My recovery was not achieved through forgiveness or reconciliation, but through a cold, hard legal calculation. You must be prepared to use legal tools to defend yourself against the people closest to you. For anyone who feels like the provider or the family ATM, remember this: your financial independence is your shield. Your credit score is your future. Never cosign. Never ignore the red flags.